When I had my spiritual awakening, I spent 2 years in isolation. Literally, I was living alone in my Florida apartment. And just so happened that was my circumstance at the time. My partner, his father had been recently diagnosed with cancer, so he left, and then I was alone in the apartment. And we had actually been going through our own separation, my partner and I. And when his dad was diagnosed, everything was kind of up in the air. We didn't know anything, but I did know what he had told me before he had left, or at least in the last few months that we were going through this separation. And he was just saying that he couldn't respect himself if he if he stayed with me. And so in those 2 years, in that first year that he left, I just remember those just feeling like, oh my God, I'm gonna change, I'm gonna do this. And there was actually a year that he was with me in the apartment, even after we had talked about separating. His parents had actually come and visited, and they went back to overseas. And then just after they had left, 2-3 months later, we got a call that his father had been diagnosed. So we had already lived together for a year, and I remember in the Florida apartment, I remember just thinking the whole time, I'm gonna become I can be the person that's worthy of my partner. And in hindsight, I have, it's only in hindsight that I can say, this whole energy that I had, this whole drive to be worthy of my partner, it was all a lie. It was all a lie. And really the only person that I ever had to be worthy of was myself. And I didn't know that because I had grown up abandoning my truth because of my relationship with my mother. And what I found in the 2 years after my partner left, and I had my own awakening experience, right? And then the 2 years after that, I remained also in silence, right? And so the third year, my partner and his mother came back, and I noticed my behavior had changed a lot, around with them. So I realized, oh my God, my behavior had changed, I guess. And then after the third year, the fourth year, I came home. And so I spent the fourth year at home with my own mother. And what I realized in all this time was that there was just a massive, massive distortion of my truth. And really what happens, the way that a distortion occurs is that for some reason, out of our survival, we're not able to know our truth. It's like the truth is there, but it's completely covered up. And what we believe instead, the programming here that's fed to us, and what we believe, our actual experience, is the lie. And so it's very clear to me that as a child, I couldn't be my truth, because if I was, then I was punished for it, or something bad would happen, or a mother would withdraw her love, or something, some kind of harm would come my way. And so I learned to please. I learned to literally abandon my truth altogether. There wasn't even a shard of it when I in these 4 years, and that's really what broke my heart. There wasn't any piece of me in here. There was nothing even reminiscent of me. It was all other people's voices and opinions. This was the programming. This is how my brain had been programmed, literally, to take other people's opinions as my own truth and play them here constantly. And so this is how I came to realize, in the 4 years that I spent in alone, just with myself, basically, just with my mind 24/7, I came to realize that as a child, this is actually what I had to do, and I couldn't be my truth. And the heartbreak, there was so much heartbreak in the third year and then the fourth year coming back home as I was realizing this, because I kept experiencing the programming every moment, and I could experience oh my gosh, I have one intention, I just closed the door, and then my mom would be like, oh, you closed it because of that. And I clearly knew when I closed the door what my intention was. But then I would go back to my room, and my brain would start playing the reason that she had just said. And it's almost like I was believing it to be my truth. And so this is exactly what I had to do as a child. And this is the program that I've been carrying my entire life. And it's no wonder, literally at 38 years old now, I've accessed my brilliance. I started accessing my brilliance a year ago, accessing my potential. And it's no wonder that it's only now that I've been able to, start living my potential. It's because, well, my potential, my brilliance was buried under my truth, and my truth was completely buried inside of me. It was like, if I hadn't spent 4 years digging it out, just literally shedding, taking out all the garbage that was inside this hole, right? It was just filled to the brim. It was like a mountain. It was a mountain of trash, and none of it was my own. If I hadn't done that, then I would have never been able to access my brilliance. I would have never been able to access my potential. And what I know very clearly now is what I experienced as the entire distortion mechanism here that would operate in the form of pleasing, in the form of it was a distortion of the truth. And I experienced that so much, especially in like the year that I came home with my mom. That I, just it really, really broke my heart because I was experiencing this all the time. Like even after 3 years now of, sitting and, looking and, clarifying, healing, meditating, right? Just being with my mind. And this fourth year, like literally it broke my heart because I was experiencing the programming even more and more intimately. And the more you sit, the more you can experience your mind even more intimately, the more you can like really understand and really be here for the experience that you're having. And so that was one of the things that really truly was difficult, and I had to really grieve. There was just heartbreak for having to go through that and grow up that way, and really like anger at my mom too for making me that way, that I couldn't be my truth. And what I came to realize is that so many people, right, their brilliance is actually buried under their truth, which is just buried under their pleasing or their abandonment of their truth, right? And it's such a natural thing because, well, even for those of us who didn't have or who don't identify as pleasers or have a significant struggle with pleasing, right? Even the most perfect of parents still aren't perfect, right? There's no such thing as a perfect human being. So that there's, on some level, every single one of us has at least a tendency to please or a tendency to some abandonment of their truth. It's not just something that's reserved for special or certain people. It's actually everybody that's experiencing like this sort of distortion in this truth, or like afraid to be seen, or hiding or covering up. It's because in that first relationship with our mother, she wasn't perfect, right? And so each and every single one of us has to do some work in coming clean, right? In literally coming clean of our distorted psyche or distorted beliefs, or like even one lie that you might be believing up until this time in your life. And life is so generous in the sense that it keeps on giving you experience after experience, so that you can actually see even the deepest rooted lie, even the most subtle lie. Like your discernment powers and your seeing powers only get higher and higher, only get better and better throughout life. The more you see, the more subtlety you'll be able to see. And so in just in the intimacy that I've been able to actually experience in my mind has been so tremendously powerful, because now I really understand the mechanism by which my mind, in the form of ADHD, which was my coping mechanism, right? All the sort of patterns that were just vigilant about my mom, right? Or vigilant about other people, right? My partner, my mother-in-law, my sibling, whoever, the people that my sort of personality, my identity considered important, right? And so the sort of whole narratives and stories and commentaries and very vivid movies, these were actually occupying my mind for my entire life. Kept me from paying attention in school, kept me from being able to have a conversation, kept me from being able to read. I've never read, like I can't read, because of ADHD. And so these sort of things, like just not being able to be present, it's really because this coping mechanism in my mind, right? It was just it was doing the best that it could. It literally thought it was, the mind's one job is to protect you. And so that's what my mind was doing ever since I was a child. And it got significantly worse when I turned 15 and I started going to high school, because my mom, her behavior was, it became the worst around that age. And so at that age, I was actually diagnosed with autoimmune. But what I actually didn't know was that actually, I had ADHD. And I had, when I was in high school, like, there were these girls in my grade, and, they were telling me about how they had, ADHD, and they got extra time on the test. And there was something in me that was like, maybe I have it too, but it was not a thought that I actually pursued. And then I went to college and I would cry because I would read the same page of the textbook over and over and over again. And I was like, why can't I read? And somehow I just, I graduated high school. Somehow I graduated college and with a decent, GPA. But, now I think about like the brilliance that I've accessed, and I realize, gosh, I'm the most eager person in the room and easily the most curious. And so it would have been so wonderful to experience school, like, in just the openness and the sort of presence that I experience now. But I mean, that's life. And it's perhaps the reason that I do the work, that I do today, because I know how a female, at least, and I think ADHD is, perhaps more common in women, and it goes really like just very much undiagnosed in women. And honestly, just this like an inability to pay attention or a struggle to pay attention, right? I think it just happens to like maybe everybody, where something stressful happens and all of a sudden in a moment you find yourself like lost in thought, right? It can happen like that. And so I've come to understand this mechanism so well, and having such severe and intense ADHD um, really has allowed me to really understand so much about how, the mind just creates suffering, in general, right? Just being with my mind, and the 4 years that I've spent with my mind and doing nothing else have really allowed me to see, like, the root of how the mind actually, creates suffering, the very root of that. And it's quite brilliant in the way that it does it, but it's just a programming, and it's brilliant in the fact that it does this, but it's also extremely stupid, right? The way that it does it, because it's literally the same. You can tell it's like the same neural pathways that are being fired off all the time, right? It's like the same story. I'm living like the same story every single day, and there's a point in time where you realize, oh my gosh, it's just the same thing every day, right? And maybe at that point you've come clear enough, like you are familiar enough with your mind, and it has dissolved and cleared so much that now, you're shifting your attention to other things, and maybe you're returning to work, and you're actually focusing your energy. It's almost like you've come to a point where you've healed enough on your own, right? And now the rest of the healing is going to come through life, right? It's going to come through integration of relationship, right? Maybe you come back home and now you're with your family or your mom, who you've had like a troubling relationship with all your life. The rest of the healing is really going to happen now in real life. And so it's really an incredible process when this process, visits us, the process of healing or awakening or ego death, or just, there's a billion different names for it. But really what it is any time in your life where you feel like, life has slowed down so much and you're like, I have no idea what's happening. Like, I literally have no clue what's happening. It's like, I can't, it, like, this period in my life looks like nothing else in my life. And I'm just sitting, or I can barely do anything, or I'm just like, oh my gosh, I could see like the delusion in my mind. I could see the distortion, right? And this is why they call it awakening, because this whole time you've been living, right, as that deluded personality, as that deluded person, like governed by the distortion, right? So if you had to, if you had to grow up, and please, or you had to grow up and, achieving was the way that, your parents, were happy, right? Whatever mechanism that, your brain sort of adopted as the way of being, that up until now, like, even, you were a child with your parents, and like now it's decades later, you don't even live with them, but now you're still operating by that same principle. And it's just an error. It's just the programming, and that program is actually your subconscious mind. It's the fear-based mind, but it actually became you. So your trauma actually became you, and you have no idea, because the beauty of that is that it literally becomes you. And it's not like there's me and then there's this, personality. I am that personality. I am that person. I am that trauma. But something happens in your life, and it's called spiritual awakening, where you actually get to see, because this personality dissolves so much and it pulls so far in front of your face, that you actually get to see for the first time that I'm not this thing. And how is that even possible, right? Because this whole time you were just operating, right? You didn't know that this thing wasn't you. But actually this identity starts to dissolve so much that you're going to actually experience it now for the first time as like a separate entity. And that's why this process is it's the most disorienting thing that a human being can experience, because literally it's you, right, that's now coming like so far in front of you, like so much apart, in order for you to see, like, oh my gosh, like, isn't this me? And literally what it is, it's like, it's a separate identity, right, that became you, like your ego, this personal identity, this fear-based identity, this trauma identity, this fear, right? This fear-based personality, it became you. And now in this healing period, you get to see that it's actually not you. But you didn't know that the whole time, right? You had no idea, because if you knew, then good, duh, right? So now you actually get to see that it's not you. And I think also in psychology, they call it like psychological awakening, or, ego death. There's so many different names for it. But every single human being, and maybe more human beings, right? Every human being is sort of on this journey, and life is sort of like, has them on this journey of sort of correcting the distortions that they have been carrying all their life. And some people, and especially those who have encountered, or experienced significant trauma, what happens is, because there's like a massive distortion, right? there's so much energy there, there's so much trauma there, that life is sort of like it's gonna trigger them. Like it's like because the mountain is so high, there's so much garbage now, like in the in the hole, right? There's so much garbage now that if I light a match, it's very quick to catch on fire, right? It's like I could throw it's not under the ground, it's like so much above ground. And so in this way, like, we're actually called, those of us that are that have a lot of trauma, right? We're gonna come to this awakening process even quicker than other people. And it's not something that we choose, right? Nobody chooses suffering. And if somebody had asked me, hey, or told me, hey Z, you're gonna be meditating on your balcony for 4 years, I probably would have laughed. I definitely would not have believed them. And so this process just happens, and it happens differently for everybody, right? A lot of people just find themselves sitting, not doing anything. Some people go off into the mountains, into the forest. They quit their job, right? Like, there's a video on YouTube about I think a surgeon who like quit his job because this process was happening for him. And I think he went into the mountains just to backpack and live in the mountains. And so, it's certainly it's a massive disruption to life. And what you really see and get to experience is a lot of peace, because the trauma and the fear was sort of hoarding all like maybe 90% of your body's energy. It was just being hoarded by your subconscious mind. It was just your fear-based personality. And so now when you get the opportunity to actually sit with that, of course you're going to give up everything in your life, because you're experiencing so much peace now. And there's great peace, but there's also there's great trauma. There's great, like, the way that you come to peace is by working through the fear. And that fear, oh my God, that's why they call this, process the most difficult transition that a human being makes in their lifetime, because the brutality of this is not something that can be explained. It's the most difficult thing that a human being goes through, and that a human being can experience in this lifetime. Because literally it's like, your whole, your self is coming apart. It's like your whole self identity is dissolving, and your identity as in like every way that you were up until this moment in your life, every way that you knew yourself to be, your entire mind, right? That's what's disorienting. It's your mind that's actually, like, you're having a thought, and midway in the thought disappears, and you're like, oh my gosh, right? If I'm not the thought, then who am I, right? And you see millions of thoughts just come up like that, and your experience is like, I'm the one that's thinking them, right? But then there's just enough space between you and the thought to be like, oh my God, am I really the one that's thinking them, or is this just the thought, like, itself? Like, thought is just arising by itself. And so this is what we mean by it's the subconscious programming, because the more and more time you spend with your mind, the more you're actually going to realize that I'm actually not the one that's thinking these thoughts. It's actually the subconscious mind that is just running the script, right? And it's brilliant, because fear is our best learner, right? Our subconscious mind is our greatest learner. What it's actually doing is it's picking up information every single moment of our life to then accumulate into its program, right? To help us and to protect us from our fear, right? And the original fear could have been when we were 2 or 3 years old, or how we had to survive our parents, or when we first discovered, oh my God, I'm separate from a mom. I'm actually a separate human being, right? I looked in the mirror and I was sitting behind my mom, and now I'm sitting to the side, and I realized, oh my gosh, I'm actually not my mom, right? So that could have been the original fear. And then there was like who I needed to be for my mom, that that developed an entire pleasing personality in me. And then every single fear, right, the thousands of fears that I accumulated in my life just sort of piled on to that, right? And so at 30 or 40, 50, 60, whenever this should happen to you, right, or younger, right, you realize, oh my gosh, this entire personality that I've been this person that I've been living as is actually my fear-based personality. And life really gives you the opportunity to clear that out. And of course, that clearing out is not going to happen overnight. And for people, sometimes it takes years and years of just sitting. I mean, I spent 4 years, right, before coming out and now, creating content about it. And, there was a thought in me, like, am I ever going to like go back to social media? Because I was creating stuff before, but, I never actually, when this process is happening, you actually just don't know anything at all. And because everything that you could know or you see, like, oh my God, my mind can't be trusted. Like, this is just thought here. And I can understand I'm familiar with the subconscious programming by now. I'm familiar with all these thought patterns. So like, I genuinely don't know what I'm gonna do, where I'm gonna go, or where I'll be tomorrow, or but slowly there's like a different kind of knowing that is restored in the being, and that's like conscious knowing. It's like not knowing that's like tangible. It's not knowing in the form of like visible thought, or like words, or any kind of thought that you can actually recognize. It's actually just, it's almost like a deeper knowing in the being. And what you realize is that all the sort of knowing that I had before, like the mental knowing, wasn't actually necessary. It was just a form of control. And so what's crazy is that, and those forms of control, right, in the form of those thoughts, they were like my way, my unique way that I feared as a child. And they sort of like built like this entire world and this entire personality, this entire identity. So without all that, your mind is just clear. And if you're just here, and there's the blue wall and the lighting, and your chair that you're sitting in, everything is like very, it's the way it always was, but you're just present. You're present more now to actually experience this moment, to actually be here now. And all of our life we spend running. We just spend running because well, that's what we've been trained to do since we were children, right? Fear is the thing that makes you run. It makes you run from your thoughts. It makes you run from discomfort, right? It makes you run from, whatever you possibly can, until like life cracks you open and sort of, either forces you to look at it, or brings you to a point where you're strong enough to look at it. And, I always like to think that whatever happens in life, right? No matter how difficult it is, and no matter at what age, I like to think that we're always ready for it. Right? Whatever happens to each of us, in our individual journeys, whatever happens, we're always ready for it. It's always what we can handle. And even if we are stretched, right, it's still what we can handle. And that's kind of the point of life, right? It's to stretch you every moment. Every moment you should be stretched. Every single moment I'm stretching. Every single moment I'm uncomfortable. Every single moment I'm stretching. And, when you're living your potential, every moment is like that for you. And you think about it, people go through extraordinary initiations, right? Physical illness, people, having COVID during, the last few years, like really difficult things. People, having incidents, accidents, being held at gunpoint, all these things are just very, very difficult, wars, being, losing their families, like just things that are just the worst suffering that somebody can't imagine going through. And it's almost like when you go through it individually, personally, right? There's a point where, and there's even a great period of struggle, right? That struggle can look like weeks, it can look like months, it can even look like years. But there's a point that comes where you turn around and you say thank you, because you realize that was that thing, that most difficult thing in your life. On some level, you needed it. And you can even like intuitively and inherently know that in your being, like, yeah, like, I needed that, because I never, there was something in me that, had never experienced anything like that. Or there was, I became physically ill and I had COVID, and I had never broken a bone in my life, right? I never experienced physical suffering. I never knew what physical suffering was. And so, or, I got into a car accident, and, God forbid, and I'd never, imagined anything like that happening to me. Whatever it was that happened for you, or I lost my job like millions of people around the world. And my sense of security was completely, it was pulled from underneath my feet. Either your health was pulled from underneath your feet, or, feeding your family, you didn't know how you were going to do that anymore. Or, something, terrible happened to you, during this time that was, maybe, people attacking you, or maybe you lost your family, or your country's in a war, like so many things, whatever, it was during this time that happened for so many people, right? It really was, it was a great awakening, and it was a mass awakening. And so many people now are emerging from that period of time, and, with new depths of consciousness, with, like different like levels of awareness that are just, it's really the time for this. And it would take something on this level, right, of this caliber, right, to really help you access and live your potential, or to just access a new level in your life. And so far in your life, like, you've been growing, you've been changing, you've been evolving, right? but maybe you weren't living your potential before. Maybe you never accessed your brilliance before. Maybe you never accessed your highest version before. Maybe you like talked a lot and dreamt a lot, but you never actually lived it before. And now millions of people are living their potential. Millions of people are coming out with new depths of consciousness. Millions of people are standing and speaking their truth. And so it's paramount, right? When something in your life happens for you, you turn around and you say thank you. You realize it, you recognize the gift that's been given to you, even if it's masqueraded as utter darkness, even if it's masqueraded as almost dying, right? Or not wanting to live anymore, not knowing how you're going to feed your family anymore, right? There's a point in time because you're capable of handling that. That's why it's been given to you. You're surviving. You have survived that, and now really it's your time to thrive. And so for millions of people around the world, that's actually what's happening. Millions of people are now thriving. And it's really, they have a new strength, they have a new foundation, they have a new stability. And that's really the point of life. It's to get you to the next level. And very often, the way that you get to the next level is by some significant challenge. And you had those challenges in your life before, right? Like you had them, maybe they were spaced out. Maybe you even had challenges, like even in the moments, right? You had challenges, but now something epic in your life has happened, right? And now you're really rising. Maybe you jumped 20 timelines or something. And now you're living as your highest version. And life is really, it's magnanimous, right? Because it would take something epic for you to actually, your potential is extraordinary. So in order to access and live your potential, you're going to have to experience extraordinary hardship, extraordinary discomfort, like discomfort that you cannot even imagine, right? That kind of discomfort. And so when you start working through that discomfort, usually the fear that you've been avoiding your whole life, right? That's really when you start living, as your highest version. And that's really the point of life, and so these experiences that you hear, people with very, very tremendous adversity, right, now living extraordinary lives, right? Or you see people and you admire them so much. What you can know, right, even without knowing their story, is that they have a story, right? And chances are it's a very difficult one. And so, whenever we should experience or we hear about these things, right, it's just so key to know. It's just to know this much, that extraordinary journey, right? Extraordinary potential equals extraordinary journey. Potential, extraordinary journey. It has to be that way, because us human beings are just so used to being comfortable all the time, right? Left up to us, we would be, laying in bed all day and, snacking on potato chips, but life won't allow that. It won't allow that. It's given us responsibilities. It's given us family. It's given us community. It's given us suffering in the world, right? If we don't rise up to our potential, there's going to be suffering in the people that we love and now in the world. And we see that more and more. Like if I don't speak up, if I'm not living my truth, if I'm not living my best life, which is ultimately my greatest contribution, it's my greatest service to humanity, then that ripple effect, right, it won't be made, right? My kindness or my wealth or my abundance, my service, my work, my knowledge, my intelligence, that ripple effect won't be made, right? And there will be suffering, there will be greater suffering as a result of that. And this is so key because we're all at a point now where we've come far enough in our life where it's like, I recognize this at such depth, right? In a way that I didn't before. And now my life is really calling me. And I'm ready for it. I had the epic experience that I needed, the initiation that I needed now to really operate my potential. And it's like, you really realize it's that initiation period of like several years of cocooning, or going into the mountains, or, having to fend for yourself for the first time, or being alone, right? Not being in a relationship, or, being bankrupt, going, in poverty, being homeless, or, living out of your car, whatever it is, being physically ill, right? It's almost like the tables were turned and everything was turned upside down. You had no idea what was going on for a long time in your life. And that's really life's way of saying, like, trust me, right? And so day after day, year after year, like years now, right? You're going through like this, like, I don't know what's going on. And the trust in you is being restored, right? The trust in yourself, the trust in life is being restored. And it's a miracle that this can happen, because most people, or many people, their tendency is to go through life living the delusion, living the lie of conditioning that they believe their entire life. And so if life should visit you, if the pandemic should visit you, if illness should visit you, if any misfortune misfortunate circumstance should visit you, say thank you. Because really, it's just life trying to get you to reach your potential. And I truly know this from my own life, because the last 4 years of my life, literally, I sat with my mind. I sat and I integrated my subconscious mind from having intense ADHD all my life. And the way that you integrate your subconscious mind normally, right, for a person who doesn't have ADHD, right, let's say, is sitting with every single thought, feeling, healing, looking, clarifying the mind, right? That's what you do every single moment, right? For somebody with ADHD, that looks like that times a million, because there's a million thoughts here all the time. And that's exactly what I did. That was my journey every single moment, fighting for my life, fighting for my presence, fighting for clarity, fighting for my mind every single moment. That's what I did for 4 years, nonstop, 24 hours a day, right? Even in my sleep, I was doing that. And so, and there wasn't much sleep during this process. It is literally an initiation. And it just goes to show you, it builds such a power and a strength in you, right? You come out as a person that you always had visions of and glimpses of inside you. Like somewhere in here, I knew that this girl, right? This girl, she dressed a certain way, or she was carefree, or she didn't care what people, thought about her. She showed up, she was authentic, right? And she was silly, or she was all these things. And she just, she dressed like all mismatched. She dressed like she was homeless. Like she was just carefree, because all my life I had been caring about all these things, and something secretly inside me just wanted to be free. And so I never knew, like I didn't, beyond those little glimpses of her in moment here or there, I didn't know what she was going to be like, right? But now that I've become her, I like something in me is like, yeah, like, this does feel like the person. It feels like the person that I had glimpses of, in moments here or there, for like 10 years in my life, right? And so it's a wonderful thing. You have to experience like a massive disruption or like a massive initiation in your life to reach and live your potential. It's the only way, because the thing that's keeping you from your potential can be so great. That distortion in you can be so great. That lie that you're believing can run so deep in you and so wide that it's affecting like every part of your life. And so many people, when they go through this period of disruption, this period of like initiation, what happens is that they're literally they're secluded, as in they're not in relationship with anybody else. They're not talking to anybody else, even their family, right? Like they're not using their phones. They're not like making contact with the outside world. Why? Because you have to strengthen the connection that you have with yourself. When the connection that you have with yourself is distorted, right? You believe in the lie. You believe like all these lies about yourself. You believe lies about your worth, right? Or there's a core lie here that's believed, that now you're like fighting with your whole life. I'm either good enough or I'm not good enough. But what you actually don't see is that the root of that is faulty. The root of that is the mistake, right? I care in this very specific way, right? And so for me, that was like, how I looked or how I sounded, or like, who I was, relationship was a really big one for me, because my core identity, right, was built, right? My survival identity was built out of relationship. It was built out of relationship with my mother. And because there was so much trauma there, that's, the whole theme of my life has been relationship. But whatever that was for you, right, sort of developed the identity that you needed to survive. And then what happens when you heal, when you awaken, when you sit with your mind, when you sit in silence, when you sit and you restore the connection with yourself, what happens is phenomenal. What happens is that way in which you were weak actually becomes your strength. Right? And you become true, you become raw, you become authentic. You feel way more than you ever did before. On some level, you realize you were always coping, you were always numbing, right? So your capacity to feel expands so much. And of course, that means you feel fear just as much as, you feel the great love that you feel, right? You're way more alive, right? You're just here, you're way more present. And so for many people that go through this process of awakening, right, it's different for every single person, because every single, human being learned to survive in a different way. But this whole eager to be alive, this is probably common amongst like every single person who awakens, because this is our natural state. Joy, peace, like love, like a sense of like just presence, right? Just an eagerness to be alive. This is our natural state. This is how we were as kids. But something happens, right, from that toddler to now the adult that you and I am, right? It's called conditioning, right? Where fear literally it becomes you. The fear of, the suppression becomes you. Like I learned in my life that it wasn't okay. My subconscious mind actually learned that it wasn't okay to be however, right? To be this eager, or to be this happy, or to be this sad, or to be this angry. My subconscious mind learned that it wasn't okay. And what my subconscious mind learned that I actually had to be like my mom, or I had to be like, it interpreted, me having to be like my mom as me having to be like everybody else that it valued, right? I had to be like my mother-in-law. I had to be like my partner. I had to be like my uncle. I had to be all the people. I had to be like my brother. I had to be like my sister. And if I wasn't, then that was literally, it was death for me. It was death for my subconscious mind interpret that as death. Like I really wouldn't be able to survive. And so to come out of that entire program, that's really what awakening is, right? It's literally like you're coming out of the entire identity, the entire person that you've been your entire life. And right? And I mean, I know that sounds crazy, but to actually experience it is like, nothing can actually, properly describe the experience of spiritual awakening, because it's like, it's literally, you become a different human being. And you didn't know this whole time that you would have to die to everything that you were and everything that you knew. And literally it was the death of you that would then bring your potential. It would allow you to access and live your potential. You had no idea, right? You had no idea. It's only until like you really do like the deep inner work. And so that's why, like, I think one of my prayers all my life was always, it was one of my prayers for like 10 years. It was like, dear God, let me see what I'm missing, right? Because I knew, especially when I was suffering, I was like, what am I missing? There's something that I'm not seeing. Like, please let me see what I'm missing. Please let me see what I'm not seeing. And that one prayer, I think, my whole life, I really just, I wanted insight. Like I just, I prayed for insight. I prayed for the ability to see myself. And God rewarded that infinitely. Like infinitely. It was somebody with extraordinary mental suffering, extreme mental suffering, extreme ADHD, right? God rewarded that, gifted me, the answer and answered my prayer infinitely. And that's usually how it is, right? You really can't imagine. Like it's always beyond anything that you imagine, and truly. And so, whenever something, comes upon your life, it's a blessing in disguise. And I know this is something that they say, but even things in your life that have happened before, you can realize, wow, that even, my loss at an early age, the death of, my parent, or death of my sibling or somebody else, my illness at an early age. I don't have to say that it happened for a reason. I don't have to, even be all fake and say that. What I can actually say is that, it really made me who I am today. That's something that I cannot doubt. So, if that's it, if that's the point of life, right? To evolve, to grow, to become somebody different, then maybe that's the point of life. Maybe that's all I can say, that I experienced something and that I grew from it. And that it actually just made me who I am today. And it's actually this person that's living their potential. And so it's said, that there's a possible theory that everything happens in our life just so that we can remember who we are. Because everything is literally happening so you can shed the distortion, right? It's like one by one, the distortion is going to be shed. And like every single moment, the distortion is going to be shed. And after the process of spiritual awakening, every moment becomes a shedding. Literally every single moment is spent in intimacy with the self, right? Which can be said as a divine, which can be said as God, the universe, whatever you want to call it. Every single moment now is spent here. There's no longer a running away or an escape. There's actually a leaning in and a deepening. And so it's one of the most beautiful times in life, when we go through our period of, initiation, because although it's just so brutal, and just, part of us is just like understandably very much so just looking for relief, right? Like, please, like, let me just get a break from this. Please let me just, escape this, that again, I don't want to go there. I don't want to look at that. Like, it's just brutal, right? There's no words to like, describe its brutality, but it's also one of the most beautiful times, because the things that we discover, and pretty soon what you're going to actually experience is that your suffering actually becomes your joy, right? And what you're actually going to experience is that when you have suffered enough, right? When you have suffered enough, your suffering becomes your joy. And that's really the point of life. That's when your weakness becomes your strength. And then that's that joy, right? That comes from the suffering. From that joy you serve. From that joy you embody the remedy to your own struggle. And how incredible that is, that life can bring us to that point. Like from a little girl that used to please and had to distort her truth, completely abandon it, and then believe the lie that her mother or somebody else now who was close to her believed about her, right? And her truth was buried and her brilliance was buried, and forget about her authenticity, but all of her potential was buried underneath the lie, under the abandonment, right? It could nowhere be found. From that little girl at 4 years old to now this adult, this woman, this human being that speaks in this way, that shows up in this way, that serves in this way. Ultimately, this is my service. My being now, my authenticity, my character, my personality now is my service. It's truly our gift, and it's life coming around full circle. And each and every single one of us is going to experience that. Life is coming around full circle for every single one of us. If your heart is open, if your mind is open and your heart is earnest, and you truly desire your best life, then it's only a matter of time. Then life is going to work its way according to your highest and your deepest desire. It's just how it is. Right? And if you're on the path of truth, if you're seeking freedom, if you're seeking goodness or liberation, right? It's just a matter of time, right? Where all these things are going to be shed from you and your eyes are going to be sufficiently clear to know the difference between the truth and the lie. And when they're sufficiently clear, you will begin to serve. You will go out into life. You will go out into the world. You will start helping other people. You will start being kind where you used to be triggered yourself and try to protect yourself. Now you're going to serve. Now you're going to be able to see, and your body is going to respond and behave in a way that meets somebody else's need. And that's literally, it's like life coming around full circle. And that's really, it's something that, each and every single one of us human beings, we were born to experience. And that it is our birthright to experience this fullness of life. And it really just depends, or is this something that you truly want, right? Do you truly desire your best life, right? And some of us very, early on, right? We come into this life with extraordinary hands, right? Very, very difficult hands, right? Loss of a parent at an early age, another parent who's mentally ill or an alcoholic or has some, severe addiction, right? Or illness, right? Munchausen's, just very difficult things that, we're forced to deal with at a very early age. And we sort of come into this life, that's our first initiation, right? That life doesn't make sense, or life's not fair, or this is how life is, right? And it even takes us years to even swallow that pill, right? To even accept that hand, right? But then as we do, right, we realize, oh my gosh, I'm already, and even coming out of that, in our childhood, we immediately realize, oh my gosh, I'm not like other people my age, right? I can't really relate to them. I mean, I can relate to everybody, but I can't really, it's like a closeness and a distance to everybody at the same time. And life really literally gives you, it's like you're born into a different perspective almost. And how beautiful that is, truly. And then so that's your first initiation. And then maybe there's another initiation that happens in the middle of your life. And then maybe you have spiritual awakening, right? Maybe there's a third initiation, then you have your spiritual awakening, right? Then you fully awaken from, you've cleared sufficiently from the distortions and the lies that you've believed, right? To be as your conditioning, right? Not just the lies that you believed from your childhood, right? But then all the things that you picked up that became your conditioning, throughout your life, all the fears that you picked up by society or culture or religion, whatever became a part of your, of the fibers of your being, that now you actually see, oh my gosh, these are actually not true to my natural being. They're not true to who I inherently am. And the only way that you see that is when they shed. Because when you have them, there's no way to know. There's no way to know what's you and what's not you. It's all just you. Until something leaves, then you're able to see, oh my gosh, that was not me. That actually wasn't me. Or that thought pattern that was playing here for years, right? That's actually not true to my true mind. Or that belief, or that story that I've been telling, or that narrative. Even my 24/7, storyteller narrative commentary here, not true to me. And that's what's so bizarre. It's I was always used to my mind, playing here all the time, and now it's not there anymore, and now it's just empty. And of course the body is not going to feel safe, right? Because, well, the whole, coping mechanism this whole time, the whole operating principle was the mind, right? So it was living in your head, literally physically living in this space all the time. And so as you return, start coming back to your body, right, which they say like is the return home, right? But actually physically occupying the space in your body, like maybe it's your chest, right, where you've, historically, held anxiety, or maybe it's your stomach, like me, right? And now you're like sort of like, you can't even like, even deep breaths are like dangerous for your nervous system. Like everything is like sort of like, even like, doing like the, counting your inhales and exhales, like counting the seconds, like even that is like difficult for your nervous system. And maybe the only thing is like a like a full exhale, like just like a let out altogether. And so you realize, oh my gosh, my body actually, it doesn't, like it needs time. It doesn't feel safe, right, in maybe the ways in this new way of operating, right? And so it's just going to take some time, right? And really what we mean by the body is it's the mind that has become, it's the mind that's controlling the body, that that doesn't feel safe in the body. So but it's amazing, because the mind actually becomes the governing principle, the operating principle in human beings, right? Until they awaken, and until they actually experience themselves without their mind, or with less and less of their mind. And that's really the beauty of life. It's really no wonder that everything slows down, because there's no way, like, in this process of awakening, your nervous system is becoming highly dysregulated, right? Because the ways in which you were sort of protecting yourself before, now you're healing and being open to, and now you're more susceptible to, like, feeling pain in those areas, right? Your nervous system's capacity, like, it's healing. So the way in which it must heal, the way you must heal, is to actually feel your pains, to actually process, right, actually feel it and experience the pain in your body, experience the emotional pain in your body. And so your nervous system becomes dysregulated like every single moment. It's just every other moment. So it's no wonder you can't do anything. You really can't do much, right? Because you're feeling pain on such a level, right? And you won't even want to do much, because when something like this happens and you experience like truly what you are in this body, then you're gonna walk out of everything in your life. You're gonna quit your job. You're gonna, like, if you have to, right? If you can afford to, right? You're gonna leave your relationship. Everything is just gonna come to like a standstill, right? Or you leave it, and life just really becomes barren. And it has to, because you have to fix the connection that you have with yourself, because it's distorted. And once you're sufficiently clear in the connection that you have with yourself, then you'll be sent out again into the world, and you'll now you're going to be serving. You're going to be serving in a way, and now you're going to know that you're serving, right? And not know it like intellectually, but something in you is going to know, like, I'm living my potential. Like, this is actually the person that I was supposed to be my whole life. But fear and conditioning were really keeping me, and now I've been sufficiently freed. And what's so funny is that the way that you actually heal, and your sort of unique trajectory of fear, and overcoming that fear, like working through that fear, now becomes your unique way in which you serve. It becomes your service to humanity. And that's such a beautiful thing, because you're living your calling, you're living your potential, you're living your highest purpose. And truly everything works out for us and is working in our highest favor, and in the Lord's. And so everything truly is happening for us, and it's happening exactly as it's supposed to. And if you're on this journey, I really wish you the best. And I think everybody is, to some extent, but there comes a point when you know that you're on it, and a point that you realize, I can't even turn back, right? I'm just in it now, and my head, my heart, everything is bowed completely to it. And that's really just, that's that love for the divine, that it just becomes a love for life. It becomes a love for the self. It's all synonymous. It's all one and the same. And so life just becomes so beautiful afterwards, even if it's so challenging, even if you're carrying like a lot of trauma, even if you're carrying a lot of difficulty, a lot of challenges, a lot of, responsibilities, life just becomes infinitely beautiful, because you've been awakened, because the presence of the divine has been awakened in you. And you're never the same after that. And life is truly, truly beautiful. And you just feel at peace, and you start to like just bless everybody wherever you go, because there's such a joy here, right? And again, a joy that comes from suffering, but then also a joy just for being alive, but even extra joy that comes from the suffering, because you've suffered so much to this point where the suffering has become the joy. So even when a thought comes up and you're like, oh my gosh, that's like a thought of like, death again, like whatever it is, right? There's something in you that, that's like, oh my gosh, I know that thing, right? Like, I know that thing, it's not me, right? And so there's a joy for it. It's like an extra joy on top of the joy and the eagerness already just to be alive. And so, you really realize, like, I can handle so much. And I have such a capacity truly have such a capacity. And the things that I've been through, I can't imagine. I really can't imagine, ever having gone through, and I can't imagine anybody, it's just 24/7 initiation, 24/7, like being with my mind, 24/7, like slaying the dragons, working through the dragons, like working with the demons, like 24/7, my nervous system getting dysregulated, 24/7, getting pinged by anxiety, 24/7, having PTSD for years and years on end. And it's all because it's an initiation. So if you're going through it, if you're experiencing it, just hang tight, just hang in there. Know that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. There is a time where, the tide turns and you're sufficiently clear and you're ready. And you're going to know that because your being is now going to move, right? And it's already doing that. It's like trust the intelligence of your being. Because there comes a point when you realize, oh my gosh, my being literally knows, like it's handling everything for me. Like, whenever I need to go somewhere or do something, like that thing happens, right? Like I don't wake up in the morning and think to myself, oh, I'm going to brush my teeth or I'm going to go use the bathroom. No, I just go do it, right? In the same way, your being is behaving like this all the time. And so you just learn to trust it. And like the mistrust in it just dissolves so much that you literally just, experience such a freedom from that lack of mistrust. And everything just turns to love. And I love you so much. And if you're benefiting from these videos, please leave a comment, share your journey, or share something that helps you or some way that you wish the video was different. I love you guys so much. Take care and God bless.